Good morning. We will call the Board Governance Committee meeting to order, and we will start with the roll call. Heidi?
Ms. Hendricks? There she is. Mr. Rosensteel? No, Mr. Rosensteel. Mr. Unterman? No. Ms. Vargas? Mr. Boykin?
Here.
Ms. Ortega? Ms. Ortega? And Ms. Zumot? And Ms. Dillon, I'll note you're here as well. Chairperson Yee, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Okay, members, first item on the agenda is approval of the committee agenda. Okay, motion by Ms. Hendricks. Second by Mr. Boykin. Any objection? Such will be the order. Consent agenda, these are the approval of the minutes from the June 10th meeting. I've had a chance to read them.
I move approval of the minutes.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Boykin, second by Ms. Hendricks. Without objection, those minutes are approved. We're on item number 3, which is an action item in part. It's the organization of reports to the board and committees. And members, if you remember, we've been through this issue a few times, but I think we finally have some organization around reports to the board and committees such that we have this as a third reading before us. And what I'd like to do is to turn it over to Ms. Lukens and to Ms. McDuffie to speak about the policy with respect to reports, and then to speak about some steps going forward about how we're going to handle it. Jill.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairperson Yee, members of the committee. So this is a continuation of the reports to the board item, as you mentioned, that was part of the fiscal year project from last fiscal year. And what we did was we took some of the recommendations of the committee and made some revisions to the report listing. We added some reports that were previously not included that were mentioned in policies, particularly investment policies. And then we also added some more authority, statutory authority and policy authority about where these reports are derived from. This report listing also included some annotations so that the committee could see the language that the reports are derived from. For example, where reports are specifically mentioned to be in writing and where reports are merely just mentioned. And then we also color-coded the report listing so that the committee could see the sort of hierarchy of reports. Which reports are statutorily required, which are required to be in writing, and which, for example, are just by board practice. And I'm told by Ed Durman that we have won the record for the most attachments to committee materials. Yeah, but that was not intended to bog down the board book. It was intended to provide the committee with more visuals about how reports are organized and, like I said, the hierarchy of reports and then which reports are referred to individual committees. So we further refined the listing, and we are recommending that the committee adopt the policy. And also, I think what would be prudent is to have the report listing sort of streamlined, remove the reports that are in blue and green. I believe those are the ones that are just by mere board policy as opposed to actual written requirements. And then, of course, remove the color coding, remove the footnotes, and have a sort of streamlined listing. I think Amy counted, and there are about 56 reports that would then be included on that. And then have the individual committees take a look at reports that are relevant to those committees and use the decision-making matrix that we provided to do that undertaking.
So I think, members, what we're looking at is the policy that is articulated on board governance page 10. And by way of just understanding the color coding, on board governance page 23 is the key to the reports to the board. And then the decision-making matrix is on board governance page 49. And so the idea here is to have this committee adopt and approve the policy that's on page 10. And then with respect to the focus of the other committees of this board would then be applying the decision-making matrix with respect to the treatment of the reports that have been identified in the staff's work as coded on page 23. Hopefully that's clear. Yes, Ms. McDuffie.
Okay, hopefully that works.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, thank you. I just wanted to add a suggestion. So as I reviewed the materials, and I think staff has done a wonderful job of providing the detail that was requested in terms of what is required by law, what is required by policy, what is happening by practice. And the idea behind your policy, of course, is to codify your existing practice. And the purpose, as we initially went into this, was to look at how to aid the board in its succession planning. That is, you have future transition, whether that be with board members turning over or management turning over, that you have some listing of what reports are required to protect you. And then, of course, having some compliance mechanism to be able to annually attest that those reports are being provided in the frequency that's specified. So that would be the idea behind approving the policy, or suggesting that it be approved today, would be to just document and record what it is that you're currently doing, and have it have the parameters be around what's legally required and what you're required to receive by your policies. Then we'll deal separately in moving forward with all of the reports, and have each of the committees, as the users of the information, work with the consultants and fiduciary counsel to evaluate the purpose. And there's a decision-making matrix that staff has developed, which is very good, which we'd like to suggest be used uniformly across the committees. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Questions? Ms. Hender.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask Amy, you're kind of outlining that. How would that look at what I'm thinking about, like the investment report? So how would you imagine the committee themselves reports? Is that something we agendize for future meetings with this, or how would you advise us?
Sure. Yes, I appreciate the question. And in talking with Mr. Bartow, that would be the approach, is to have the actual reports agendized. So you have a forum that you can all talk about what you're receiving using the matrix that I believe is on Board Governance 49, in consultation with your specific committee consultants and fiduciary counsel. And again, that would be evaluating the purpose. There's criteria here on Board Governance 49 that staff has suggested here in terms of the delegation that's in place, whether the reporting is consistent with that delegation, what adjustments need to be made, whether or not a report could in fact be delegated to the CEO, or some other venue with exception reporting back to the board. So it would be taking a further look at those reports going forward.
If I could add, we see this as the beginning of a process that might be a 2-year process as it cycles through each committee, and each committee follows the matrix that you've suggested, and then goes back and maybe looks at the authorizations or the delegation authority. For example, if a committee decides that they want to delegate something to the CEO, but have a monitoring function, or bring it back for an exception, we would then want to come back and tie that up with the official delegation to the CEO. So when we've talked about it, we see that as sort of this is the beginning of a process that's going to take place throughout the committees and the board.
Follow up with that, buddy. Do I need to? Am I on there?
Follow up.
Sorry.
Yeah, I did.
I was having issues yesterday.
So click in, Sharon.
I did.
Okay, now click on that, and then go ahead and up where it says floor. Click on floor, and it should move her there.
Okay. There we go.
Oh,
No, you're down here.
Her, and then click the floor.
Well, it won't be broadcast.
Oh,
There you go.
got it. Thank you. I don't know how to do what she's trying to do either. So again, I'm just looking at the matrix then. So are we going to just automatically, is staff going to just make sure that these are on the agendas for the different committees? Yeah. Okay, I just want to make sure that that's just happening, so I don't have to think about that for the chair.
We would work with the chair and the vice chair and Jack and others to set this on the agenda for each committee.
I'm really eager, obviously, to kind of lighten the investment staff's load on just, efficiency so they can focus on the things we want them to focus on. So I'm excited about this process and look forward to starting the journey.
Yeah. I think also in answer to that, Sharon, that it gives the committees, the primary users of the reports, also an opportunity to suggest any revisions, and the board governance committee will kind of be the hub of collecting all of that input. But it'll be kind of over the next 2 years that we'll probably be getting all of those reports before the respective committees based on each committee's work life schedule. Okay. All right. Mr. Unterman.
Thank you. My question was going to be how long this is going to take, but now I'm thinking, why do we have to take 2 years? That's a long time and a lot of work to affect what was an effort to try and reduce the load of things that are coming to the committee and the members.
I appreciate that. It really was, we were trying to be realistic about the mechanics of setting your committee meetings and your board meetings, and then the ultimate return to the full board to address the delegation of the CEO. Because under the statute, the board delegates to the CEO, and then the CEO can sub-delegate. So it really was just the mechanics of and the timing of meetings. So we were being conservative. So I don't want to speak for the chair, but I think the sentiment of everyone involved is, we agree with you. We'd like it to move faster. We were just trying to be more realistic.
I think we're possible, just given the different schedules that committees are following in terms of their meetings. I think 2 years was kind of the outside time frame for getting it all covered. So, and it may be quicker than that. Okay, great. Ms. Dillon.
Well, could I just follow up on that?
Yes, of course.
It would seem to me that as to a lot of these committees, the staff could make a recommendation to us as to how to refine the reporting process and reduce the number of reports we get. And we could take that recommendation and we have a list of things that are being eliminated or changed or combined. And we'd say, no, I really love that report on whatever or not. And that we could move a lot quicker if you would do that. I don't know that it would violate any of our fiduciary duties to respond to a staff recommendation that way, as opposed to taking the bottoms up ground, bit by bit, report by report at a committee level meeting.
I think that's.
Invite you to think about that as a way to expedite things, because.
So if I can, what this list does is I think it sort of circumscribes the universe for the committees to take a look at, and then it'll be up to the chair of each committee working with staff how to approach this, and certainly with input from consultants and, as necessary, fiduciary counsel and general counsel. So I think what we're asking today is to approve the policy, which is on Board Governance 10, and then this sort of landscape that we're basically setting the script. Your committee is setting the script to follow, and then it'll be up to the individual work of the committees. So again, those suggestions would be quite helpful as they engage in that process.
And I think your suggestion, Tom, is one that we'll incorporate as we work with each of the committees about the reports that are within their purview. The whole idea here is to make it easier, be sure we're not missing anything that with respect to our compliance responsibilities that we're being consistent. So but part of interacting with each of the committees is exactly that. If there are opportunities to streamline, we certainly will bring this forward.
Okay.
Okay. Dana, Dylan.
There we go.
There you go.
About the time issue, we could do it quicker than a couple of years and take Tom's idea into consideration. One of the things that we have said as a board is that we don't want to do 3 days, but if we return to a 3-day for a certain amount of time, we could probably get these out in a shorter time frame. So it's kind of, how do we weigh our need to have less days of meetings but still do all the work that we want to do in a condensed manner? So I just leave that up to the board. I have to say, this was a tremendous amount of work. And I don't know how to start. But I embraced the electronic stuff wholeheartedly and left my paper binder with my tags in the past. That said, this was very difficult to read because of the multitude of colors and the multitude of pages and the multitude of information. And the key was only on 2 pages. And so I found it difficult to remember. I had to write notes and do all that stuff. I would ask that we think about a different way when we have information of this volume that has that needs a key or is that complicated. If we could get either a paper version or figure out how we can do it on our iPads. I could have done it on a laptop and had 2 windows open and had the key open all the time and run through the information. But on an iPad, it's really difficult. And if we put the key on every single page, it would have made it an enormous file. So I don't know how to do that, but I'm just asking us to think about how we could present so much information that's so complicated in an easier fashion for us to use on our electronic devices that we're now using. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks.
Great.
It's an excellent point as this process gets underway.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Thanks.
Other comments, members? Okay.
Oops.
Yes. Tom.
So I'm sorry, I'm still puzzled why we can't just sort of jumpstart this with a recommendation from the staff to each of the committees as to how to consolidate reports and what to cut out and what to delegate, and just do that so that we can have a committee meeting and say, yes, we agree with the staff, or no, I love this one, we'll report, and get it done. All the committees are going to meet in relatively short order. I don't know why we need. We're going to have a committee meeting and we'll get this whole list of reports. Then we'll sit there at the committee meeting and say, now tell us what each of these reports are, and why do we get them and all that, and what would you? And then we'll end up saying, what would you do to simplify this? And then you'll say, well, okay, at the next meeting, I'll tell you what we do to simplify it. It seems to me we're making this harder than it needs to be.
So,
I think we wholeheartedly appreciate your comments and have taken your input. And I think what would happen is staff would work with the chair of the committee to prepare the item. And there may very well be, during that process, as the item is prepared, staff working with the consultants. So anything that comes before the committee should have recommendations from staff. And so I would hope that each individual committee would not have to go through this laborious process, that there would be at least some front loading of the item. And so I think we take those suggestions seriously, and I think that's actually a very good way to act efficiently.
And another consideration is that the individual committees are probably better suited to evaluate the reports that are relevant to those particular areas.
I think you're giving us more credit.
I think benefits and services would feel that way. I think benefits and services would feel that way.
What?
that we have more expertise as that committee and would want input on that than.
Oh,
just
yeah, no, I'm just saying,
blanket some-
but not
yeah.
than the staff, particularly as to how they're prepared and all that sort of stuff.
Sharon?
So I would move approval of policy. I think, Tom's suggestion is helpful. I'm just thinking a lot about the investment committee, and I would want to work with Paul and Chris about when in the agenda for next spring we should talk about this, because we have a lot of other big picture items to deal with. But I think the suggestion of having an agenda item in the investment committee where we have, staff are the ones that are writing these reports. So we have expertise, but they have the most expertise. They're the ones writing it. So they kind of have a better sense to me of, I get feedback all the time, like, well, it doesn't seem like people are reading it, or is it really, and I'm always talking to the investment committee members saying, is this helpful to you or not? So I like Tom's suggestion, and I think as chair of the investment committee would direct our investment staff to agendize an item sometime, probably in April or June or something, and then come with recommendations for what reports should go. And then I think that's a good idea, though, is to have staff come with recommendations so that we have something to dialogue about, and then we can bring our expertise and go, actually, no, I really like this report. It adds value to my, But I think that's a good suggestion to have that be have there be a recommendation for us to interact around. So I support the item. And obviously other chairs of other committees can do it, but that's how I would like to approach it, and I think that could be an efficient way to handle it.
All right, thank you,
Yeah,
Sharon.
that was a long-winded motion. Thank you, Grant.
So motion by Sharon to adopt the policies, or second? Second by Mr. Unterman, and I think, so we talk about the policy, and then perhaps, if appropriate, we can incorporate Tom's suggestion into our decision-making matrix, just so staff is coming in with recommendations with respect to the reports for the committees. Okay, great. Let's see, Michelle.
I was just going to second, but then also ask a question. So related to the great criteria that was put together as part of the item, which I really appreciated, the criteria and the questions that are asked around each report, just for that diligence factor because there was a reason a report was, put together in the first place. Would that be then, as they determined, as they brought the recommendations forward, is the thought that the chair would work with the individual, with the investment staff or whomever as they make those recommendations to go through those criteria, or with the individual committees? I just was wondering what the idea was for those criteria to be used as the lens for the recommendations that are brought forward, or if those were the lens that the committee itself would be determining as they move through. And maybe it's different for each committee, but I was just curious as to the intention.
I think the idea was that the committees would be using this criteria to filter through and look at the reports and, make those sorts of determinations.
Yeah, and these were suggested criteria, so there may be more, or maybe not even the full complement of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, we have a motion and a second on the policy, and then also that includes ratification of the decision-making matrix. Any comments, further discussion? Without objection? Thank you. The policy is approved. Thank you. And thank you very much for all the great work on this, from the starting point of where we began. It's,
I just take
Brian?
a moment. What you see before you, this tremendous amount of work was primarily done by Jill as our ethics and compliance counsel, and so there's a lot of legal analysis that went into this. So thank you, Jill.
Great. Thank you very much. Alrighty. Next item, informational item 4. This is a summary of our board self-assessment and the next steps going forward. Amy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this item was just to provide the board.
Before you continue, I think there's a member of the public that
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Good morning.
Yeah, Ed Folio, CTA and EA retired. And I wanted to look at your draft of under governance number 5. We talked about that briefly at the last meeting of the governance committee. My question is this. board attendance is very important because you want to make sure that there's reports and stuff like that. Let's say the controller's office all of a sudden said, we're too busy. And instead of you coming and, let's say, sending your representative, you stop coming. How does the board handle that? Do they approach the controller and say, what's happening here? Why aren't you here? What's the mechanism to make sure that the controller does what they're supposed to constitutionally do, sit on the board, if they decide not to?
Brian?
This is purely a hypothetical, first of all. I want
to
to make sure that we're clear on that.
Our controller would never do that. We know that.
Exactly, that's right. You'll notice who the chair of the board governance committee is. So we have discussed that. There's a code of conduct, and so, pardon my back. There's a code of conduct that we have. This board always has had a very moral voice and very collegial. And so up until this point, it has not been an issue, but part of the ongoing discussions, and we may revisit this, is actually what is the mechanism
Right.
when there is someone who's not complying with the various things that they are supposed to comply with. And that, I think, item number 5 is the beginning of that, is sort of we start a compliance program. And again, I don't know.
Okay.
That was a hypothetical.
No, yeah, and I understand, and I really appreciate your answer, because we do have a situation where we have appointees that are, and of course, as you know, we have one that in the retirement area that is now going on 5 years. Now, I wonder if we would try to start the process of letting the person who is supposed to appoint that position, let them know that they haven't done it. I think you have a responsibility to make sure that you have a full board. And whatever it takes for that to happen, I understand you did talk about this at your retreat or at the Riverside meeting, and what I'm doing is saying, under this particular, you have the mechanism right here to start the process finally to get a retiree seated on the board. And people I know are upset at me because I keep on bringing it up and I keep on sound like a broken record. But, representation is representation. And it's not fair to the tens of thousands retirees to not have a voice on this board for one day, let alone now 5 years. So I will continue to bring this up, but you have the mechanism to do something here. And I hope that the board will do something. I know that we're not asking you to appoint a certain person. We're just asking you fill the position. That's all we're asking. And so I hope that I am not overstepping my bounds, but I really am very, very concerned, and so are the members of our association. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Grant, please.
Mr. Folio, thank you for your comments. I just want to let you know, I think I've told you this before, every time I have occasion to speak to the governor's appointment office, because of your comments, I bring up the vacancy. So, for what it's worth.
Well, if enough people keep on saying it, and especially people, every one of you that are sitting around that table have a great deal of credibility because of the fact you're there because you were elected or you were also one of the appointees. So you have a lot of credibility. And I hope that every one of you will do exactly what Grant has been doing, because, you know, we're not trying to preempt the governor's ability to appoint. What we're asking is the governor move and appoint. That's all. I mean, it's that quick, that simple.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Dana, please.
So Ed, thank you for that lead-in, because I was actually going to wait till the board meeting, but it seems like it's more fortuitous to go ahead and take this up now. We did talk about having the retiree seat filled and what obligation we had under board governance and our fiduciary responsibility as a board when we had the conversation with Professor Umseem at the offsite. And at that time, he basically told us that, yeah, we have a responsibility to express our opinion with the governor. So maybe if a motion passes at the board governance committee to be forwarded onto the board, maybe that would carry more weight than just the board doing it itself. So I'd like to move that the chair of CalSTRS write a letter to the governor expressing our desire to have that seat filled as soon as possible.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Dillon.
Yeah, well,
Right.
With all due respect, it's
Oh,
not.
I can't.
It's
I'm
not
not a
on the
member of the
agenda.
committee.
Well, that's one, and it's also not. It's also not. See, I was going to spare you that by starting off by saying it's not on the agenda. And yes, also that part.
okay, I'll leave it to you guys. I might have to do it at the board if nobody does it here.
But I believe a suggestion that it be included on the agenda would be in order.
Could the chair direct staff?
Yeah.
Direct staff.
Can we notice this item on the agenda?
I
You mean
encourage us
for
to do
today?
something.
Can the chair just write a letter by his own accord,
Well,
responding to peer pressure?
well, is it the chair of the board governance committee or the chair of the
board.
chair of the board? Well, there would have to be a meeting and discussion and arrival at consensus, and
Just as a private citizen, respond.
that's not up to me to decide. We're talking about a board item, so.
But it needs to
I
come from the
appreciate
board.
It needs to come
It
from
needs
the
to
board.
come from the board.
It needs to be part of a discussion, so.
So I'd
That's
encourage somebody from
that's
the
my
committee
Bagley
to
Keene
make
hat.
that
Brian, how
motion.
about we notice that this item be agendized the next board meeting? Can we do that? Okay. Great.
Does the next one be today?
No, that would be, yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. Amy, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So we're back on the board self-assessment.
Yes, so the purpose of this item was just to brief the committee on some of the governance enhancements that resulted from the board self-evaluation discussion in October. There were just several topics, so I'll just briefly highlight them. The first primary topic was around agenda development, and this topic was linked to a number of sub-items. One of the first ones that I noted was the agenda setting process overall. There was some clarification on that, and the board chair and vice chair had reaffirmed and encouraged individual board members to contact them directly to get items and suggested agenda items placed as appropriate. The second item under agenda development was around the annual development of the board and committee work plans. And there was a desire by the board from the discussion to have a little bit better linkage between the annual work plans of the board and the committee and the broader strategic plan. So that was an item that really the underlying purpose was to establish better continuity in the board's prior decisions with what, of course, is set from a policy perspective and strategic perspective. And then, of course, as that filtered through future agenda items, the request was to ensure that agenda items properly referenced or linked back to whatever policy or portion of the strategic plan that was, again, decided previously. And so we shared that with with staff as well in terms of looking at the agenda item write-ups and better clarifying that. Some of that happens already as you look at your write-ups. There's some good delineation of which policy it refers to, and so this again is just an enhancement. Another item that came up was with respect to the 2-day meeting schedule and the ability of appeals committee members to be able to fully attend and participate in other committee meetings. And the challenge was that the appeals committee is scheduled concurrently with other committees. And so I believe starting in February, you're going to see the appeals committee meeting move to the 3rd day so that appeals committee members can more fully participate in other committee proceedings. The second primary topic that the board discussed, which you'll see happen in February, is around the budget process. And the board had wanted some better insight into what the process was for setting the budget and then tracking it, budget versus actual, throughout the year. So that budget workshop has been scheduled for the full board. You'll see that happen in February. And then a couple of other minor points. The board had requested that I ensure or confirm with staff that the new trustee orientation handbook was actually made available to you on your board resources website. It has a wealth of reference information contained within, and after talking with staff, I confirmed that it is indeed out on your board resources website for your use. The other minor topics were around your continuing education requirements, and if you recall, the Board Governance Committee approved a policy earlier this year that established some requirements over a 2-year period for all board members and their designees, 24 hours of continuing education. And we've come up with a personal tracker tool, if you will, that we developed along with staff, and we'll make that available for you to use to track your own personal continuing education hours against the policy requirement. And then lastly, as it relates to continuing education, through the board self-evaluation process, some of you had indicated some items or topics that you were interested in hearing more about, and that collective input was shared with your CEO so that as he considers notifying you about educational opportunities going forward, or perhaps scheduling education sessions throughout your board and committee meetings, that those items that you are most interested in are taken into consideration. So you'll see some of these items move forward in terms of changes as they come up throughout the year. And again, this was just to provide an update in terms of what are those items, so when you see them, you know how they came about. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Amy. Questions? Thank you. Very much appreciate the summary. Thank you. All right. Members, next item number 5, Board Accountability and Compliance, and turn this over to Brian and Jill.
Thank you. So the background of this item is that as part of the fiscal year 2015-16 Board Governance Committee work plan, the committee expressed an interest in reviewing board compliance functions and the policies and legal requirements around those. So what we did is we took a review of the board policy manual and undertook an effort to summarize the main compliance-related reporting and disclosure requirements that board members have. And so those are all provided in the attachment. The idea is that we wanted to provide the committee in a consolidated fashion a listing of all the compliance functions that and reporting requirements that are required of the board members, and provide an overview of the compliance-related processes. As a corollary to this item, the Office of Ethics and Compliance has undertaken to contract with a compliance consultant, and that compliance consultant is currently reviewing compliance processes and procedures within the organization, looking at our structure and looking at the compliance functions that the agency is required to abide by. And the consultant will also provide recommendations with regard to how the compliance program should be structured. So in that regard, staff recommends having the compliance consultant also include review of the compliance functions and requirements of board members in that undertaking. and make an evaluation of that and an assessment. We're also open to receiving comments from the committee about improvements to the compliance reporting procedures that currently are required. And with that, we're open to taking any comments from the committee.
Okay. Questions, discussion, members? No? Okay.
This was an informational
Yes.
item. It's the first time we pulled this all together.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Jill. All right. Next item, review of information requests. I don't believe there were any.
No, just a request from Ms. Dillon, who is, as we stated earlier, not
Yeah.
actually part of the committee, but to possibly just make the organizational item 3 or press a key or a legend so that it's easier to read on electronic devices. So no really.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. And next item, the draft agenda. Our next meeting will be in April 2016. Any comments? Okay. Hearing none. I want to offer another opportunity for additional statements from the public. Anyone from the public wish to speak? Okay. Hearing none, the Board Governance Committee is adjourned. Thank you.